whatever it's the specific sticks or even the specific tuning. Yes, Ryan, go for it. I see you got your hand up for that.
No, I'm just pointing at the cat.
Yeah. Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Cleartone Collective podcast, the show for church tech engineers and creatives who are all about making live streams sound just as good as what it sounds like in the room, if not better. In this first episode, we're going to be pulling back the curtain on why we started Cleartone, the problems we kept seeing in church audio, and what we think the future of live stream sound really looks like. And spoiler alert, it's not more gear, actually. It's just better systems, better support, and better ears behind the board. Now, with me here today, I've, of course, got our co-founders here, Ryan Palma over on the West Coast. Say hi, Ryan.
Hey, everybody.
And I've got Alex Hayes up in the north, greeting us from good old Wisconsin.
Hello.
And I'm down here in Austin, Texas. We're so glad that you joined and listened to it. So before we kind of talk about today's main topic of like pain points in church broadcasts and everything, let's kind of talk a little bit about why we're even starting this podcast, and even more so why we started Cleartone. So this podcast really is just to serve as a place for us as kind of three guys who have come together through the internet, actually, to learn how can we better help the church when it comes to audio. Because audio, as much as people think it's super easy, it can get really complex once you start adding in more than one thing into place. So let's talk a little bit, guys, about what are some of the actual pain points that we've learned over the years as audio engineers, but then even recently over the last few years when it comes to church audio broadcast. Because really, I think everyone can agree here that COVID really kind of took off everyone's broadcast mix. Everyone learned at that time, like, oh crap, we really need to actually level up our game because we sound great in the room, but we didn't put any money, any budget, any attention into what's actually happening online. And now it's the new front door for churches. People don't go shopping for churches or go find new churches by going to new places physically on Sundays. They go learn online. They go catch up on a sermon somewhere, or maybe they listen to a message on YouTube, on Instagram. So let me talk about these pain points. First, let me throw it to Alex here. Alex, what are some of the things that you've noticed over the years that are really kind of pain points for a lot of church broadcast audio? What's the thing that kind of like sticks out to you the most that you find you're maybe fixing or addressing first?
Saying specifically broadcast, I mean, I think I want to start and answer at just a general level. Like, what is something that everyone struggles with in general? And my core answer is intentionality. I find that complacency is a root of a large chunk of problems. If you're not newly deploying things, in the sense of like, you know, maybe our laundry list on Sunday morning is 20 items long, and, you know, maybe we don't feel like making that extra run up to the stage to move the kick mic,
right?
You know, at 2 inches. But is it going to make a difference? It might. It might solve the problem.
Well, why would it make a difference?
I mean, if you're especially in a broadcast environment, you know, if it's a problem at front of house and broadcast and you fix it in the mix, did front of house and broadcast make the adjustment, or did just one of them? And then you start, you know, wavering quality for either in the room or online, or it's not the same, you know. So, you know, I always tell people consistent intentionality will always win. It'll win over spending a whole bunch of money. It'll win over hiring, you know, a company to come in once and do all this stuff. It just always wins. The last place I worked at, you know, as you were talking about during the COVID thing, the way that we did our COVID stuff was we would have our Thursday rehearsal turned into like a recording session. We'd live record everything, take it home to the studio, mix it down, and then re-upload it. And between that process and then like the following when we went back to live, it was like we'd have our first Sunday service, and literally as soon as the team got off the stage, they would go into the green room and listen to the set. And they would come to our halfway through the morning meeting and be like, we're going to tighten this up. We're going to tighten this up. Hey, online, can you, you know, adjust blah, blah, blah on the guitar so it sounds more like this? Like, we came to that meeting with bullet lists, and it wasn't like, y'all sucked, you did a terrible job, let's do this, right? It was a, no, this is what we want to improve. And we did that for like 4 to 6 months. And then we got to this point where, like, you know, as I look back and I talk to people as I'm contracting for these other places, like other churches in the area now, and almost all of them have been like, what did you guys do? Because you had the best mix in the area. And I was just like, we were just consistent and we were intentional about what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
Don't become complacent. That's the best thing I could say to that.
Absolutely. And I think you brought up a really good kind of thing that everyone started to do during COVID, and it kind of probably led to them really realizing how broadcast was so important, was that a lot of churches didn't have the ability to go live right away, so they pre-recorded. And they used the same gear that they used on Sundays to do that. And they realized, oh my goodness, we can sound really great with this same stuff that we use on Sunday, but we have to do it a little bit differently, and we have to think about it a little bit differently. Ryan, tell me a little bit from your experience here in terms of mixing and everything, and kind of speaking to that intentionality. How important is that really when it comes to what we do here with audio, whether it's at front of house, whether it's at broadcast, or anywhere in the spectrum of audio?
Yeah, no, I think intentionality is definitely a key. Love everything Alex said. When it comes to broadcast in particular, the one thing I noticed that a lot of people are tending to do is they are mixing their broadcast audio like it's supposed to be front of house. And you have to remember, you're not mixing for that specific room anymore. You're mixing for everything. And, I think one of the things that I noticed a lot is people are cutting way more than they have to and worrying about things that maybe are going to keep hindering the mix.
Yeah, kind of go into it a little bit. Like when you say cutting more than what they should be, like what does that mean exactly in your world?
Yeah, so when it comes to like EQing, for instance, I think there is a level of precision that is being what's a good word for that? It's they're using a little too much of the precision, I think. Because the one thing you have to remember about, especially with things that are live, and even comparing this to like a studio setting, mic bleed is not the end of the world. It is not supposed to be your enemy.
And sometimes can be your friend even if you use it right.
And I think a lot of people are worried about things like that a little too much, and they let it affect their mix. And the thing I noticed a lot with these broadcast mixes are they are trying to make all this separation when we don't really need the separation. We want it to be glued together.
Right.
So you got to take a step back and just think, okay, how can I help this instead of how could I fix this?
Yeah, and I think that from there's two different perspectives for that. There's how can you fix this on the stage where all the sources of audio are coming from, whether it's the microphone, whether it's the actual guitar amp or drum set, whatever it's the specific sticks or even the specific tuning. Yes, Ryan, go for it. I see you got your hand up for that.
No, I'm just pointing at the cat.
Yeah.
She's sleeping.
But yeah, like I think you made a really good point with that. Like there's intentionality that needs to be had on both sides, whether it's how you place the microphone somewhere to what is the actual tuning of the drum set. Like that is, I can't tell you how many times I've walked up to a drum kit at a church and I let the drummer play it for a second. I'm like, man, I think that could sound better. And all I did was go up there and tighten the bottom head a little bit, loosen the top head a touch, and make sure the microphone was where I wanted it. And I didn't change anything at the board, and it suddenly was like, oh, there's the sound. That's what I needed. It's all about that intentionality. But then, too, like you were talking about with, like, cutting too much and whatnot, like how much you're really shaping stuff to be sounding great. And I'm going to assume here that what you're kind of referring to is how we can tend to make things sound great in solo, by really cutting things out and making sure there's nothing else in that signal we don't want. And then the moment you've put it back in with the context of things, it's suddenly like, well, none of this sounds great together.
Right. Yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm pointing out. And, I tend to want to multi-band things more than cut things. So we could tame those areas rather than just get rid of them. Because the thing is, we're capturing a signal, and that's what it's supposed to sound like. Now, to your point, whether the source was good, whether the mic was on the right spot, like that is something else to talk about. And, that's something that maybe your local church volunteer isn't going to have the knowledge of or the experience just to say, hey, maybe we should move this a couple inches to the right and it'll sound way better.
Yeah, and I don't know about you guys, but like I know for me in some of the churches I've worked at, like I being as a musician as well as an engineer, like I tend to like the first thing I do when I walk into any space, especially if I'm new to it, is I go make friends with the band and talk about their gear and kind of get to know it. That way they feel like they know I hear them and that I'm a trustworthy person when it comes to feedback. Because when that time comes where it's like, hey, the guitar player really needs to turn down that overdrive. It's just killing everything else and saturating too much. I can go up to him and be like, hey, this room sounds really great, but if you were to turn it down, your distortion just a touch, you're going to give everyone else space to really breathe with you and not feel like you're just crushing everybody. And we can have that conversation because of that intentionality and because of that relationship. So let me ask you guys this. Is there ever, I'm kind of going off script here a little bit. Has there ever been a time or a space where you've kind of had to walk someone through with that, whether it was a musician or maybe even another engineer, where you were like, hey, I think if we did this, it'll help everybody else out in the grand scheme of things when it comes to the mix. Alex, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I do that a lot. A lot of my big live mixing right now is like a very large church's student ministry and stuff, so there's a lot of like students may not know entirely what they're needing. Like they might be able to articulate something that's bothering them, but they might not be able to tell you what the correct solution is, right? Like, example, in monitor mixing, 90% of the time, someone says they need more of something. If they already have a solid mix, they actually need less of something else. But they're going to ask for more of something. So if I pull up my Sens on faders and everything, what they're asking for is at unity, I'm like, I could give them more of that, but I could clip the pack. Or I could go, gee, the vocalist standing right next to you is also at unity. Could I pull them down a little bit so that your vocal, starts to sit up a little higher? The effect is often the same, but it's different. So, but like you're getting at, having that relationship, you kind of have to build that, because if you came in swinging, for that's kind of a gentler example is in terms to the relationship with the stage people. But I'm kind of with you. I like to go, talk to my people. I can't tell you the amount of times I've had people throw me a show and tell me that this band is ridiculously hard to work with and they're anal about this and that and that and that. And I get there and I go up and talk to them for 10 minutes. And I find most of those people having a music background, most of those people are either people that are musically educated or very far along in knowing what they want. And as soon as you throw out some of the big words that they're used to speaking and they realize that you get it and that you're on the same page with them, they just relax. Just about all of those shows that I've been a part of, I've never had that experience with those people. I go up, take 10 minutes to get to know them, and like you said, that gives them kind of this established rapport. You can back and forth, communicate about it, never really run into that as a problem.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're able to break that barrier that there tends to be between the stage and front of house. And this also bleeds into as well broadcast. Broadcast has to have the same kind of relationship too, even though they're not in the same room always all the time, whether it's someone who's, in a mixing room, control room somewhere, or it's like in our case where we're remote mixing, like being able to bridge that gap between what's happening in the broadcast room and what's happening on stage is huge. Cause like there's times even when broadcast has a specific need that they need to address that maybe it doesn't bother front of house as much, but it for sure is going to benefit them greatly because, I mean, to me, broadcast tends to be putting everything under the microscope compared to front of house. Front of house, you get a lot of leeway because you've got room acoustics to deal with, the PA tuning, people in the room, all that stuff. There's a lot of things that kind of cover things unless it's a really, really greatly tuned system and a really great room. But for the rest of the time, though, broadcast is seeing every detail and it's all there in front of it. And if it's not done correct before it gets to broadcast, then broadcast has to figure out how to make it work, or they're going to have to make the steps on stage to go fix that. Ryan, what did you have to say about this? Because I think I saw you kind of thinking, I saw the gears spinning in your head on this one.
Yeah, actually, the gears started spinning when you brought up overdrive for guitar.
Huh?
Because this is actually one of the number one things anytime I'm in a studio working with a guitarist. A lot of people tend to have too much low end and too much overdrive whenever they do want to use distortion. And one of the things that people don't consider is that when you are recording something or you're trying to capture a signal like that, usually the more overdrive, like you're technically clipping your guitar when you do that. And one of the things that happens, the more you put up, the more smeary the signal gets. You lose a lot of clarity. So the guys that want to have like a ripping solo at a certain part, it's like, hey, I know you want to dime that, but let's take it to about 3, still distorted, but you're going to get a lot of clarity out of it. It's still going to sound nice in the mix. And the same applies for a rhythm guitarist too. Like the less you use, the better it actually sounds, and the more it cuts through a mix.
Right. Just because the dial goes to 11 doesn't mean you got to ride it at 11 to get the full use of the pedal. Like there is a time and place for that. But
yeah, and I get it. It's cool. You
Yeah.
can turn it up. It can be loud. And, you know, if you've got a 4x12 cabinet, like, it's like, oh, man, I can make this room shake. But that doesn't mean it's great for a recording or a capture environment at all.
We don't
Right.
need those in church.
Well, and in church especially, you know, you don't need, well, first off, you don't need a cabinet that big.
Yeah.
You don't need a cabinet.
Yeah, I mean, look, these days, I think everyone could switch over to their floorboards, like the Neural DSP stuff, you know,
Yeah.
because you're gonna be plugging into the PA, you're gonna have a monitoring system, like, you know, as long as you have a sound guy that's like any of us, you're gonna be in a good position without a speaker anymore.
Yeah, I mean, especially with today's technology when it comes to modeling and everything in the whole guitar amp world, like it's gotten so much better. And even too with like drums, like there's some really, really great electronic drums that are starting to come out now, and it's actually really impressive. I remember when sometimes you do youth camps or whatever, or you go to like a smaller event area and they set up an electric drum kit, and you're like, man, this just isn't doing it. It doesn't sound great at all. And like as an engineer, I'm like, man, I can't even connect to this because it sounds so bad. But now it's gotten so much better to the point where I'm not even thinking about it as much.
Dude, electric drums are amazing, especially for like student ministry, because you can map, you could have like a queued up list and map your kick to those synth kicks and stuff for those kind of modern songs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've done songs where like my high tom is mapped to like a hand clap because there were no toms. Like, you can do so much.
Yeah.
Sure, you could buy a sample pad, but the whole kit is a sample pad.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I've actually got one of the Nitro Mesh kits here that I use for doing demos and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I have that mapped to the Get Good Drums setup. And,
Yeah.
you know, with that, I feel like I'm tracking in a studio because the sounds are so high quality and the responsiveness compared to how electric kits used to be. It's just night and day. And that's one of the
Yeah.
cheaper kits too, the Nitro Mesh.
Yeah. No, that's the thing is like the cost of entry to get quality now has really started to go down, whether it's in the actual physical hardware, but even now with like the sample libraries and the software to run it, like it's just gotten so much more affordable and so easy to get into it. Let's change gears here a little bit here. So let's talk about, because we've all done broadcast mixing before for a long time. Let's talk about what are probably the first things that we listen for to judge whether or not we're going to have a really great mix or we're not. I know for me, I'm huge on drums. If a drum mix sounds great, if the sources sound great, I'm going to have a great time. But if the drums just aren't vibing, if they're not sounding the way I want them to in terms of like in the context of the rest of the mix, but also just like, is there any life in them? Is the drums, are they actually being captured well? I'm going to be struggling because I'm going to be really focused on making sure that sounds great. Ryan, tell me, what's kind of like the thing that like sticks out to you the most? Where do you kind of find yourself going first? Is it drums? Is it vocals, room mics? Where do you kind of find yourself like really defining things first?
Yeah, well, it's a mix of things for me. So for me, when I'm listening, I'm listening specifically for our rhythm and bass, so drums and bass, and vocals. Now, if those three things are sitting well or they're being captured well, I know it's going to be an easy time. If those things are struggling, maybe the players aren't, quite up to par, or we're just not getting good signal. Maybe the toms are all clipping, and they've got some tom heavy songs. Like, that could ruin a song.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, the toms tend to be overlooked a lot of times, especially when it comes to tuning, I feel like, because...
Oh, of course.
I mean, drum tuning's hard. Unless you really have spent a long time actually spending time with drum tuning it and like listening to it, knowing what each head does, it can feel really confusing and really challenging to find a way to get your drums to sound good. And then on top of that, you got to figure out, okay, do I want to dampen? Do I want to not? What kind of sticks am I going to use that work best for me? What kind of heads am I going to use? Am I going to put the microphone on the shell, or am I going to put it on a stand? Because that even makes a difference too. There's all kinds of variables to it. I mean, you've practically got 5 to 12 different instruments that you got to manage as a drummer versus like a guitar player who's got one.
You want to know the biggest mistake that church drum tuning people make?
Uh-oh, Alex is dropping a bomb here.
I mean, I'm not, we could talk. I could spend the rest of this podcast talking about drums if you really wanted to.
We'll have to do a drum episode for sure.
Drums have a range. The amount of times I've seen people, specifically like floor toms, they want that big fat Bethel, like, right? But you can't get that off of like a 16-inch tom. It's got to be a big drum. Like the drum has a limit, and if you tune it out of its range, you start getting like either flabby heads or I don't think I've ever heard anyone tune it too high for the range. It's usually you try to tune it outside of the low end of it, and there comes a point where it's like tune it inside of its range. You know, at that point, if you still want it to be beefy, a lot of the times you can give it some EQ in the low end and kind of get that presence that you want. It's not usually so high away from that low end that it's a big deal, but the amount of just garbage and rumble, like bad rumble that introduces, like I'm not gonna say that's a make or break because that's kind of how we stemmed this, but like the amount of times I've tried to kind of talk people through that, I'm like, dude, just try tuning it up a little bit. It's like, because when you hit it and it rings for 4 hours, that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, if I can clarify here, so when you mean like tune it within its range, you're talking about making sure that the tom is tuned to what works best for it as its own instrument.
As a drum.
Not
yes.
Not as a, well, it should sound this way because it's this floor tom. It's the drum itself has its sweet spot of what sounds best depending on the shell.
Technically, I heard a recording of me giving this advice to someone, and I like left the conversation. I'm like, I'm a crazy person. But like if you take both the heads off the drum and hit the side of it, it will technically resonate at a note. Like that's technically the sweetest spot of that drum.
Right, because that's its natural resonance.
That's a lot of intentionality, right? You know, but you know, every once in a while, if you're redoing all your kit heads, why not? Right? At least take the experience. You kind of mentioned earlier, like, hey, you know, not everyone's going to have the expertise to do some of this stuff. The biggest advice into getting there is try it. Right? Take all the stuff up, replace your heads, hit the side of it, try to tune it to that. What's the worst that happens? It doesn't work, and you end up tuning it to something else. Once you have the heads back on, it's a matter of just turning the key.
Yeah. Brian, what
same thing with mic placement. Try it.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah. Well, if you want that low, get a timpani, all right? And you know, with drums in particular, especially like just spending so much time in a recording studio, like the biggest difference that we're getting with recording drums is like in a live setting, you don't have the luxury of tuning your drums for every song. Whereas in a studio, you can tune your drums for every song. You could change out your snares, you know, you could change out your cymbals, which does make a difference. If we are playing a song in the key of E and you have that drum set tuned to that key, it does cut through the mix better. It really does. And, you know, I've spent countless hours we changed brand new drum heads and, you know, had something in the key of A. And then we were like, you know what? We got to tune this up one more octave on the snare. And it made a huge difference for the song. It was incredible. So little things like that do matter. But when we are in a situation where, hey, we can't change things for every song. You know, we either need to accommodate for that prior during practice, make sure that everything's tuned up, or, you know, if you want to be like someone like Lorna Lewis and have two snares doing two different things, I mean, go for it, man. Like,
yeah,
you know, I'm sure that, you know, your 32 tracks at your local church will be able to accommodate two snares.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got the resources and that works best for you and your workflow, why not? You know, and I do know that there are several churches out there that do that approach, and there are times where they will have a second snare on standby ready to go in case they really feel like, man, I need this sound for this song. Like the song doesn't hit the room, it doesn't actually resonate with people unless we actually do this intentionally. Sometimes even guitar players will pull out a different guitar for that same reason. It's the same thing. Like it's all about intentionality, which I think is a really great way for us to wrap this up. Is intentionality is king when it comes to having a good sound. But there are other parts to it too. And I'm going to kind of throw you guys a little softball here. So I think we can all agree here that it's always down to the fundamentals when it comes to really making sure things sound the best. And that comes down to things like gain, EQ, how you balance things. So, we are working on building that framework out every time we do a mix, whether it's on, a console or in the DAW. However we're approaching it, it comes down to those things. So let's talk a little bit about how there is some kind of myths almost, if you will, when it comes to gear and when it comes to budget and all that stuff, and how really you don't have to always have the top level gear to get a good sound. With us being in church background as well as in studio world background, like, we've all gotten to work with the gamut of stuff, and I think we can all agree, yes, the gear that is out there that's worth thousands of dollars does have its place and absolutely sounds better. But not always do people understand why. So let me go to you, Ryan, first, since I know you spend a lot of time in the studio here. Talk to us. Why does having that expensive, really great gear that everyone knows is like, oh man, if I just had that Neumann, if I just had that Nord or whatever, that Neve, that API, whatever that is, why does that matter? And how does it make life better versus like some simple gear that you can buy at Guitar Center sometimes?
Sure. Hey, you know what? I think there's a simple answer that answers both those questions. It gets you to the end point quicker. That is the number one thing about having nice analog gear, is that it just gets you that nice end result a lot quicker than if we have to, use a bunch of plugins to emulate that. And, when you compare A to B, like, there's always going to be a slight difference, but that's the magic of it. Like, if you really want that analog sound, you got to go buy it. That's the truth of it. But if you don't mind having something similar, something close, getting the plugin version's okay. Especially in 2025, look, they've come a long way with the plugins. They all sound great. And to the untrained ear, I do believe you could trick anybody. And to your point about, worrying about things like gain structure, honestly, more than EQ or anything, I think if you have solid gain structure, we could do anything with your mix. Anything. Like, my rule of thumb in a studio for everything I track, I never hit 6. So I'd never get into the yellow just so I have headroom to work with, because the number one thing about mixing is that you could always add more volume. And, unfortunately, so here's the trade-off when you are buying cheaper preamps. They are noisier. The more expensive the preamp, the less noise it has as you turn up the gain. Yep. And that is the one thing to keep in mind. Like, if you have a cheaper pre, you might want to keep the gain a little low and have your source louder. Like, if you have the luxury of plugging in, or if you have the luxury of playing through an amp, it would be nice to just have the preamp low and the output to the preamp high.
Yeah. So in the context then of, say, like broadcast, how does that affect us? So, like, for example, we're kind of, as a broadcast engineer, sometimes just kind of dealt the cards of whatever the gear was for front of house to work with. And what may have worked for them sometimes doesn't always work for us. So, like, why do we think that we need to have that kind of expensive gear for those things? But yet a lot of times the churches, they don't have it. So why do they believe this myth that we have to have this crazy amount of high end gear in order to be able to achieve greatness when it comes to like broadcast?
I think that has more to do with that. That's just what people tell them. That's what your local sales guy at the audio store is going to tell you. Anybody that has a decades of experience doing this, they understand that you don't need that top of the line gear to get that result. And especially, look, if you're hiring top local talent too at your church, or they just want to come do worship and they are excellent players, excellent vocalists, look, you already got something great right there. You don't need the gear to go with it. Now, if I'm going to go buy $100 guitar versus a custom guitar, yeah, the neck feels a little different. It's probably easier for me to play for a couple hours versus a couple minutes. there are differences when you do enter that realm of professional gear, but it's not the end all be all. You can get away with a Behringer setup these days. I mean, a lot of people will make jokes about that, but at the end of the day, if that's all you can afford, trust me, there's a way to make it work and make it sound great.
Yeah, I mean, I know all of us have mixed our fair share of broadcast mixes that came from an X32, which still to this day, as old as that console is, it's still amazing that they've yet to really replace that hardware. They've just done the firmware updates over the last, oh my gosh, is it over 15 years now, I think? I mean, that came out back in the early 2000s, and it's still everywhere. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've done some setups where we went to go get them installed with the DAW setup, and they were still rocking the original firmware, like 1.0, 2.0, and we're on like 4 now. Like, those things are resilient. But as long as the right sources were feeding into those consoles, they could sound really great. I mean, there's so many churches and even touring acts that are using them still. They're great as long as there's intentionality behind how to use it and understanding of how to use it well. Alex, let me ask you this. On the flip side, what's a moment where maybe either a big church or even a small church that you've been to or have experience with where they had the gear or they didn't have the gear, but they still shocked you? Like, I know a lot of times we see these big churches have all the amazing toys that we would love to have our hands on all the time. But you go there and, like, it doesn't sound great. And you're like, what's going on? What have you ever seen anything like that? Have you ever been a part of something like that? Or maybe even, been in a position where you're able to kind of find out why it was that way?
Kind of. So the last job I had was kind of in this area. It would be considered large next to most churches, but I would call it medium just because, as I'm currently contracting at like the largest church in the area, so leaving that job, I ended up contracting for most of the other like pretty large churches in the area, so I've kind of gotten to see them all. And after having done that, I got to this point where I'm like, man, so the largest one, probably while I held the tech director role at the one I was at, went through like 3 or 4 people in the amount of time that I was there. And so, stepping into contract, and I start looking, I'm like, just trying to do basic things that you would expect at a larger level you would have infrastructure-wise. Networking, things talking to each other, inside of one space, and it's just not there. Or it doesn't exist, or the backbone is there, but no one has ever bothered to take the time to set it up or learn how to, like, completely loop those functionalities into each other. And I keep looking back, and I'm like, man, like, I was very blessed to have a school district IT administrator on my volunteer team. So we had a pretty awesome infrastructure. I'm like, I would take that infrastructure over the toys. Because, I mean, working on an SD8 and stuff, and it's not like it sounds bad. I will say that when I catch recordings sometimes, I ask myself, is this the best that a 1,200 person congregation has? Or it's probably more than that. It's probably 2,000 or 3,000. But, I was like, is this the best that we have? Surely there's more people that sing or whatever, That's kind of what that is. But we're, meanwhile, we're rocking like Axient wireless systems. And I'm like, you could put this on a wired mic. Understand why we would do that. So, I have seen it that way. And this is probably a good segue into like my favorite conversation of this all the time, and people will fight me about it. But you can, like Ryan said, you don't have to have their super expensive gear. There is a level that it starts becoming helpful and nice. On the end that he's talking about, the sonic quality of it. Oftentimes, depending on how old your PA is, if it can't reproduce, some of that kind of finer content it's going to get washed out anyways. So that's something to consider. But if you have a good PA and a good tuned room, some of that is going to make a difference. But all of those players will be able to get just as good of a sound out of that half the cost instrument or whatever. Or if they're bringing their own, they're fine. But my favorite example is the Nord. The amount of places that I've been to that use Nords, that it's literally, what happens is they go from a traditional service to a contemporary service, and they take their piano player and put him on a keyboard, and then they play the Nord. And like you could buy a keyboard for a third of the price with a, and hook it up to a computer with like a very well emulated grand piano patch and get the same result. Now, the Nord has a place. It has some good sounds. Lots of keyboard players like how it feels because of the weighted keys. Totally get all of that. But if you're going to spend $3,000 on an instrument, especially if your reason is because all the other churches use it, you're going to find yourself going, why does our keyboard playing not sound like the other churches? And the reason is the guy from SEU or whoever you're, Bethel or whoever you're comparing yourself to, has probably read the entire Nord manual, spent a whole bunch of time either at home or in his church playing on it, learning where things are, learning what sounds he likes to use during service, learning how to use all the knobs and faders to transition between those seamlessly in real time. And that's the secret. And that's why some of those people like that. A lot of those high-end things, not only do they have a sonic character, but they add flexibility to the workflow, right? They have options.
Yeah, it's so funny you brought up the whole Nord thing because we were all the three of us were all talking about this yesterday. I think it was yesterday. The Nord is such a great example because it's been a staple. That red piano has been a staple in churches for a long time. Yet I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a church that has a Nord and I walk up to it and it's still rocking just the first patch on it.
Two patches, right?
Yeah, the first
piano and pad.
Yeah. And then
That's
I ask them, and I'll be mixing them like, hey, can you roll some of the high end off of that for the verses because it's really bright, and they go, how do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, so you've got the gear, but you don't have the knowledge, understanding to bring intentionality to how to use it.
I've had people get it stuck in transpose mode where they're trying to play in D, but it's playing in C, and nobody knows how to undo it. Like it's like it's great to have that, but if only one person knows how to use it, there's two parts to the issue, right? One, if nobody knows how to use it, but two, nobody wants to learn how to use it. I've been in a lot of environments where, you feed back to like someone who does take the time to read the manual and learn how to use the gear. And then, hey, we want to live stream in this room. Can you come help us? Sure. Let me show you how to do this. Do you used to know how to set up your stream key? No, I'll show you. Well, I don't want to learn. Right? Well, if everybody in the building wants to stream one event per month and you only have one person who's willing to learn how to do it, how's that going to work? Right? If you only have one person out of your 5 keyboard players that's willing to learn how to use the keyboard, you're either going to see 1 in every 5 services be this much like more well executed at the band level because you have people that are really learning that, like digging into that stuff, and then people are just kind of riding it out. I always tell people, I was like, never stop learning. When you stop learning, that's the minute complacency sets in and you're going to be old news.
Yeah, I would hope that everyone who takes away anything from this video here, this podcast that we're doing here, is that this is not an opportunity to just hear from people who are talking about gear and talking about technique and what we've learned, but they actually walk away with something every time because they have a desire to learn something new every time. Because I mean, we all are experts in our field here, but we're still learning every day. Like we learn from each other all the time. We are all, because we're in different facets of everything when it comes to what we do here. Everyone has kind of like their main thing they really love, but because of also us being so multi-talented in all these areas, like we're constantly learning and chasing after how can we be better, how can we get better at what we do, and that comes from that I word, intentionality of wanting to seek that out and be best at what you do. And not just to say you're perfect at it, but to be bringing excellence to it. I think that's the other thing too.
And understand it.
Yeah.
Don't just learn how to do it. Learn why. Learn why. Why
Yes.
do we make that choice, or how does this work? Or hey, I learned this EQ trick on Instagram or whatever, but why does that work? What does that trick do? Because the more you learn the fundamental like core values of what all that stuff is, for the lack of the better or the lack of anything else to say it, kind of like the whole like learn how to break the rules. If you know how like phase or how your EQs work or whatever mix trick you're using works, if something starts not working, sometimes there's a really sneaky like unofficial rule breaky way to solve the problem that when you know the science, you can use the science to your advantage.
Alex brought up a good thing earlier too. So if you want to get a keyboard at a third of the price and you own a Nord, I will buy your keyboard for a third of the price. So you could get that new keyboard.
There's a new website going up, ryansusednords.com.
I will
Nord
buy your
gear.
Nords, and you could buy something else with that money.
All right, well, hey, let's kind of start wrapping this up here. I'm going to throw out a really interesting question I thought that would be a really great thing for everybody to kind of think about as they go into the weekend of whatever weekend they got coming up here. And that is, and let's frame this from the broadcast perspective for this episode here. So if you didn't have $1 to your name to spend to improve your system or improve your mix, what's the first thing you would do? I'll start with this. I think the first thing I'm going to do is dial back that reverb and delay in my mix, because I can't tell you how many times I've listened to a live stream mix only to go, you know what? This is smeared in reverb and delay, and to the point where I can't hear anything else. It's so hard to understand intelligibility. It's distracting. I hear it more than I feel it. It doesn't feel like it's a part of like the vocals, or like the vocals are in a completely different space. So I would challenge anybody who is trying to just improve their mix this weekend, and this I guess could also work in front of house too, is try dialing back your reverb and delay just a little bit. Because my personal rule of thumb is if I can hear it, then it's too loud. But if I can't feel it, then it's too little. That's kind of my approach. Ryan, if you didn't have any money to spend on fixing your mix this weekend for your broadcast, what's the first thing you would do?
Organization is key. First thing I would do is make sure that my session is nice and organized, because I like organization to the point where if I'm working on a session for somebody this weekend and I pass it over to Alex, he should be able to open this and understand everything I did and understand what changes I made just by looking at it. And for me, part of that is, and I know this is a little extreme from what I've seen you guys do, but this is just my personal take on it because I feel like it really glues things together more. But I do like making buses for drums, parallel compression on drums, the instrument section, and then having all the instruments go into a music bus afterwards, and then having an effects bus post my reverbs and my delays, and then a separate vocal bus that goes into a final vocal bus, all into a sub mix before we get to this master chain. And the reason I do that is just so along the way we have more control. So if we notice that there's something going wrong, we don't have to turn off a whole mix to figure out what is this. Like, we could see in sections like, okay, this is the line we're going down. There's something wrong here. Now I know I could fix it like this. And the other reason is just organization wise, like, okay, now I know if like my guitar section's just a little too loud, I have a guitar bus right here before it goes into the music bus.
Yeah, to your point, I want to hop in here because Ryan, you really spoke to me a couple of weeks ago when we were talking, is that you tend to treat everything when there's multiple of things, whether it's guitars, vocals, or the drums themselves. And I think the drums is like the easiest to understand, but you like to view all of these groups as one instrument almost.
Yeah.
In that, like the drums, even though you've got 10 microphones or more on that, it's one instrument. The vocals, even though you may have 8 or more vocalists, it's one instrument. And the only way to treat things like that and think about it that way is through organization, which tends to, in our case, be coming through busing. And that's where that intentionality of how you organize things and think about how you're going to process them comes into play.
Yeah, because, for background vocals, for instance, right? If we have a church set up that they know microphones 3 through 8 are going to be background vocals every single week, I mean, that's great for us, because then I could think of like, okay, let's create a bus just for that. Let's cut some extra low end out so they sit a little further back in the mix, but they're supporting the leads. And, that to me, that's where it makes sense as a group. Like, our vocals, that's an instrument as well. So we should be treating it as one. It's not different from the drums. It's not different from a keyboard. Like, it's got a wide spectrum.
Yeah.
And, with that being said, it makes it easy. Now, obviously, there are churches that they're not that organized, and they're going to have a different lead vocalist every week, and that's okay too, because there's a different approach to that. Like, if I was going to have them all send to one vocal bus, I think this was the conversation we were all having, is that instead of just cutting out low end, I'd rather tame the low end, because a baritone versus a soprano, they're hitting that low end spectrum differently anyways. And when you're taming that low end to maybe not be so muddy, is like what a lot of people will perceive that 150 to 400 area as, and they just, let's cut it out at 200 and let's have a dip. And it's like, okay, now the vocals don't sound natural anymore though. We're losing a lot of that natural aspect of it. So if we're just pulling some back, it's okay in that spectrum, because, a soprano, they're not going to have, like, their root is going to live in that area, but it's not going to be as affected as like when we have the baritone in that area.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Alex, what would you say is like the thing you would chase after most when it comes to improving your mix without having to spend a dime to fix anything?
Well, Ryan stole half my answers. After
Sorry,
he
Alex.
went into his second part of his answer, I was like, shut up!
Well, okay. Is there anything that you would add or anything from it that like really like you're like, yes, this is so
I'm going to
important.
tweak the question just a little bit, because I think what threw me off originally was you said, what will you do to improve your mix? And I'm going to answer it as, what would I do to improve a mix?
Yeah.
Like if you brought me in to work on your mix and we had $0, the top couple things that I find myself doing. The first thing, especially if I'm at front of house, the first thing I do is I almost always turn off whatever your EQ is, as we were talking about, right? Like we were just talking about, it's often we're cutting way too much low mids, or, if you do that thing that is very dangerous where, Joe Schmo always uses mic 1, so we EQ'd it once and we never change it, right? That often causes problems through the years or months or whatever. So I often will either reset or bypass processing and bring it back in as I need it. Oftentimes just turning that off and just very small EQ moves as opposed to these giant cuts bring, like we're talking about, that low mid energy brings all this life back into it. People go, what'd you do? I was like, I just turned off what you did. Right? Like not a lot of stuff going on there, but like sometimes less is more, right? Next thing, and I'm hybridating this with front of house work and broadcast rather than just broadcast, but the rest of it goes into kind of what Ryan is saying, that it requires organization, but for me, bus processing, especially live, vocal group, specifically for me, it's usually like very light, gentle compression to bring things together. I find a lot when we get into situations with like weaker vocalists that you'll find that they kind of sound like you have this vocal and this vocal and this vocal and this vocal, and they're all separate. Like it sounds like 4 people singing at the same time, and just a little bit of compression on that vocal bus will make them, like we were just talking about, sound like one vocal team, which is normally the rule that they're fulfilling, less whoever's leading, right? But it's usually pretty easy to get them on top of that. So smaller stuff like that, kind of, based around that organization, though. We can't do that if we're not organized and that flow is set up to a way that we can see where that stuff is and happens. Because, the moment you start adding that, and, if there's a DCA on the thing, you now have a vocal DCA, a vocal processing group, and a vocal mic. That's 3 places that you can turn something up or down. I tend to like to leave my input levels, as close to unity as I can, and then process at the bus. Because if we start mixing the faders too hard in a live broadcast type thing, we start changing the level that's going into our bus compressor.
Hey, just to throw on to what you just mentioned too, when using any type of compressor on a vocal like that, where we're hearing like 4 different vocalists, once you start to get in a 4-to-1 ratio or higher, whoever has the most gain is going to pretty much just take over that compression, and everyone else is going to be dipped so low that you won't hear it. So light compression is the key. 2-to-1, make sure
I like
the threshold's just
1.5
tapping
to
it.
1.
But if somebody's got like a fixed compressor, 2-to-1 is the way to go. Because I think it's more common that you're going to see a fixed compressor in a lot of situations.
Yeah,
for sure.
For sure. All right, well, gentlemen, that's going to wrap up what we are going to be talking about today. So first off, thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast. We've got another episode hopefully coming here soon where we're actually going to be talking about how we like to actually mix for broadcast, specifically keeping in mind that 9 times out of 10, you're not listening to it on good old monitors or a nice pair of speakers. You're probably listening to it on your iPhone or AirPods, and how we as engineers really try to take that into consideration. And lastly, don't forget to go to cleartoneco.com where you can learn more about what we do here and come be a part of our Discord, as well as get your mixes done with us on Sunday. We would love to have you part of our tribe here. We will see you guys in the next episode.